Is there anything quite like a campfire? The community that's built there by people sharing their stories and singing their songs is truly special and so intimate. It's like being 10 years of age again and sharing all your secrets with your best friend. And that openness and vulnerability is exactly what we should see in the greatest community on earth, the church. There are no walls out here, and there should be no walls of defense towards God or each other, even if we have been hurt. To be on a journey as God's family, going through the highs and lows of life, suffering and laughing together, that's what I want. Not some holy huddle where we all pretend everything is okay, but a real community who believes in the God of miracles, but also in the God of the trials. That's what the world needs too. So let's give out the invites, put aside our selfish ways, and
Welcome to City Point Church. It's my week to be up here and talk. I got a quick question for you guys. Have you ever experienced a summer camp lost and found? Like the step above the trash can and just the most random stuff makes it into the lost and found. I had the opportunity to work a few summer camps as an intern kind of at the beginning of college, and it's crazy the stuff that goes in there. Like some kid's gonna still want it. Surprising the number of dirty white socks. Like more dirty white socks than there are campers at the camp, and they all get thrown into a bin. Like these kids are gonna come back and look for them. Or like, you know, you dig deep enough and you find half-eaten candy bars. Or something that a kid can't live without, like an iPod or a wallet or something. And you just lump all these things together into this big bin because they're not quite trash, but they're not important enough for you to figure out who it belongs to. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about Lost and Found. This is an interesting one I found today. It's a Lost and Found from, I think it's pronounced Ragbri. Anyway, this group gets together and they ride bicycles across the state of Iowa. Doesn't that sound exciting? From this event, they collect all these things. And there's like, you know, things you expect, water bottles, bicycle helmets, some reading glasses. Maybe somebody would want those back. But there's like car keys in there. How do you leave car keys? Like, how did they get home? But they're here in the Lost and Found. And there's like cell phones and things. On the list, they actually posted a list of everything for the bikers or the cyclists, I guess I should say. They're not bikers. Cyclists could get on and check, and they mentioned that all the wallets had already been mailed to their owners. So the organizers deemed wallets important enough to take action on. But all these were just thrown into the Lost and Found. And the question that you ask yourself before you throw it in the Lost and Found, or throw it in the trash, is this item worth coming back for? Is this item worth coming back for? Because if it's not, you just throw it away. But if it's worth coming back for, it goes on Lost and Found. Unless it's really nice and then it goes home with you. You didn't find it, right? Anyway, so today we're going to talk about the parable of the lost sheep. And it's in the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Matthew, but we're going to talk specifically about the Gospel of Luke because Luke kind of fleshes out this situation that's going on. And so we pick up in Luke 15, verse 1. And Luke says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" So let's take a break right there. It's just the beginning of the parable. But I want to make a point. You guys remember a few weeks ago, Jim Bob talked about the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, right? Both in the temple, both praying, and the contrast between their prayers. And it's interesting that it actually comes up a lot in the Gospels, this contrast between the tax collector and the Pharisee. So I think it's good to get a little bit of a background. First off, Jim Bob did a pretty good job of explaining what a tax collector is. And I think it's easy for all of us to be angry and hate the man for taking our money. But the truth of the matter is we can't compare an IRS agent today to a tax collector, because we belong to a federal republic. We vote our officials in. They decide how much tax is paid to maintain different things. We might not necessarily agree on it, but as a nation we voted on it, and it was determined. The Israelites had been taken over by Rome. So they had been oppressed by this other nation, and this other nation went to the Israelite people and said, we need some of you to collect money for us. Not so that we can fix your roads or pay for your kids to go to school, but because we're better than you, and our army whipped yours, and so now you're going to pay us. And on top of that, for collecting our monies, if you happen to find a few more coins, then you can keep them yourself. So these tax collectors were Israelites who agreed to do Rome's dirty work, and the way they benefited was by taking extra from their own people. So it's a lot worse than some of your income going to taxes. And then the sinners, that would just be the group of people who don't obey the Torah. So I don't know why the writers distinguishes the two, but you have the tax collectors, which is the dirt of the earth, and the sinners, which is everybody who doesn't practice the law. And then this other group, the Pharisees. Now, I've always imagined the Pharisees to kind of be like the priests, and we see pictures of them, and they are all like dressed up in their doodads and their vests and their hats and things. But I did a little research about the Pharisees, and actually the majority of the Pharisees were just normal, everyday people. They weren't priests. The priests stayed at the temple. These were just everyday people, and their job was to live among the Israelite people and encourage them to live a righteous life. Which sounds a lot like what Jesus came to do. But they butt heads all the time. So you have these guys, and they really just want the best for the people, right? I mean, their original intention was to keep Israel from going through this cycle that they did in the Old Testament, where they would turn away from God, and God would remove His protection, and then they would have to turn back to God, and God would send in a Redeemer. That's a lot of wasted time. So the Pharisees were there to try to keep that from happening. But Jesus treats the Pharisees and the sinners very differently. We have examples of Jesus' interaction with obvious sinners, like the woman at the well, or the woman who was caught in adultery. All He says to her is, sin no more. So there's a harsh word, and there's a call to leave that lifestyle, but it's nothing compared to what Jesus says about the Pharisees. We see in Matthew chapter 23, He paints this picture of the way things should be. Then Jesus said to the crowd and to His disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must be careful to do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. So Jesus is kind of saying, do as they say, but not as they do, because Jesus is also trying to get the Israelite people to live a righteous life. Right? Same goal, different outcome. Jesus goes on in this passage to give 7 rebukes to the Pharisees. And some of them are a little bit more familiar than others, but he kind of, one of them is, he calls the Pharisees whitewashed tombs full of dead men's bones. Because on the outside, the Pharisees looked like they had it all together. Right? They were doing the right thing. They were living the right life. They were the upper class. They were the deacons of the church. But on the inside, they were just hypocritical and wicked. And Jesus even goes as far as to say, at the end of the passage, like a brood of vipers, he says, how will you escape being condemned to hell? So Jesus has this headbutt that happens throughout the gospel with the Pharisees. Now, Jesus is supposed to be the Messiah, right? That's the story of the gospel, Jesus the Messiah. The Messiah was supposed to come and rule and reign. He's going to set the Israelites free from the Romans. Or that's what everyone believed. So he would come in and make friends with the Pharisees because they're the leaders, right? He would come in and hobnob with the upper class because that's what it takes to rule. But that's not what Jesus did. In fact, Jesus was doing the opposite. Jesus was hanging out with the worst of people. Like the people that you wouldn't want to have anything to do with. And it's not just that they have no influence, they have negative influence. Like, society dislikes Jesus more because of the people he hangs out with. He doesn't look like the Messiah that everybody's waiting on. So, Jesus overhears them talking about him hanging out with the tax collectors and the sinners. And there was one other group in Israel that might have been as bad as a tax collector or a sinner, and those were the shepherds. And I didn't know this whenever I got started, right? Because there's shepherds all through the Old Testament. Highly esteemed. The Israelites were a nomadic people. They traveled around as shepherds for a long time. But apparently when they were slaves in Egypt, the Egyptian people, they had already developed agriculture. So they didn't like these nomadic sheep herders because the sheep would come in and ruin their crops. So they already disliked shepherds. And so whenever the Israelites came in and were slaves of the Egyptians, the Israelites developed this agriculture mentality, and they took that in with them to the Promised Land. And it actually says the few tribes that still remain shepherds, they lived outside, kind of on the edge of the Promised Land, because everybody else practiced agriculture. And so there was this downward spiral of the shepherd. Now, King David kind of brought back some of the popularity, right? Because he was a shepherd that was anointed to be king. So for a little while, shepherds were back in the limelight, but they fell off quick. And to the point where in Jesus' time, when he's talking about shepherds, they were the lowest of classes. And the class levels were maintained by the Pharisees. So these were the lowest classes, shunned by the Pharisees, and they weren't the best of people either. They weren't allowed to be a witness in court. In fact, you would get in trouble if you bought something from a shepherd because they stole so often, it was just assumed everything in their possession had been stolen from somebody. And the reason was, they traveled around. They didn't have like one pasture that they sat in. This was back in the day. There was just open country everywhere. They would just walk with the sheep and travel around. So it was nothing for them to bed the sheep down at night, walk into a city, steal some stuff, and then just disappear. That's easy, right? They just walk off into the desert somewhere. So we have these Pharisees, and they already dislike the tax collectors and the sinners. They have a special hatred for the shepherds. And Jesus overhears them murmuring about who he hangs out with, the terrible people that he spends his time with. And so he decides to tell a story, and he starts off by saying, all right, so if you were a shepherd, do you see the irony there? Jesus is not about making friends with the Pharisees. So we pick up in Luke 15. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. And we're going to stop right there. we need a little bit of a lesson about sheep, because I don't know about you guys, but I don't have much experience with sheep. And so it's important in this parable to know a little bit. Sheep are gregarious, which means they live in groups. That's their only defense, to get in a large group. And if they were out in the wild, they would get in a large group, and if a predator came in, you would just outrun somebody slower than you, and you would survive. And that's why you live in a group. So that's their defense. You kick somebody in the knee, and then you take off running, and that dude gets caught instead of you. You hear the people say that sheep are stupid. I don't know if you can call them stupid. I mean, they're animals, so they're not going to be highly intelligent. But there's characteristics about sheep that just make them seem a little bit worse off than the rest of the animal kingdom. Sheep have this strong instinct to follow. So if one sheep starts walking, other sheep will get in behind him to follow him no matter where he's going. Even if he walks off the edge of the cliff, they just keep their head down and watch his butt, and they'll walk off the cliff too. And the worst part is, they have this strong instinct of following, but they have no instinct of leadership at all as a species. There's actually a group took some special time to breed a race of sheep in Iceland known as leader sheep. And they were specially bred so that if they got lost, they could find their way home. That means that every other sheep can't find its way home if it gets lost. And two, like I said before, there's not a lot of that a sheep can do if it's alone, right? Sheep don't have large talons. And they might have a nasty bite. I don't know. I've never been bit by a sheep. But I guarantee you, if, like we heard on the news that a sheep trailer had tumped over in Farmington, tumped is a word, and spilled sheep everywhere, we wouldn't be worried about walking out to our car. I'd be checking the refrigerator to see if there was carrots, trying to get those sheep to come close enough to pet. Because nobody is scared of a sheep. In fact, sheep are so terrible that if one falls over, like it just falls over onto its back, there's a really good chance it'll just die. They're so fluffy they can't roll back up onto their legs, and then they start freaking out, and they try harder, and they just get their heart racing and they die. And there's a name for it, it's called a cast sheep, if a sheep falls over and dies. So the shepherds would follow the sheep around and kick them back up on their legs when they fell over, and scare off the bigger predators. But that's what you had to do with sheep. And sheep would get lost because they're sitting there grazing, and then they look up and they say, "Hey, look, grass." And they walk over here and they start grazing. And they look, "Hey, grass." And they walk over here and they start grazing. "Hey, here's some grass over here." Where is everybody? That's a sheep. That's the life of a sheep. And so it wasn't uncommon for them to get lost, and the majority of the time, if they got lost, they would trip over, and you wouldn't be there to kick them back up on their feet, so they would be dead by the time you found them. So Jesus poses. I'm sorry. Let me go back. So just to kind of give you guys an idea of what 100 sheep looks like. Because I would think, right, if a sheep is that helpless, it would be in your best interest to go find the one that was lost. This is what 100 sheep, not this one, the next one. This is what 100 sheep looks like, and I know it's in a heart shape. It was extremely difficult to find a picture of 100 sheep. And I think this one's like 105. But sheep come together, you can't count them in a picture, it's ridiculous. But I found this, and it was commissioned by some person over in Great Britain. I think it was the chair of the Young Farmers Club, and they were trying to do a fundraiser for the British Heart Foundation, and so they commissioned a photographer to take this picture. It took her all day to get these sheep in the shape of a heart. And finally, I think she did it with like Charlotte food. But this is about what 100 sheep looks like. And I have another picture of them kind of on the side of a hill when she was trying to get them together. And so you kind of have an idea. That's 100, roundabout. It might be like 103 or something, but that's 100 sheep. And you're missing one of them. All right. So Jesus poses this question. Then Jesus told them this parable. So suppose one of you had 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? So Jesus is asking this question, and it's kind of almost rhetorical. He's like, well, wouldn't you go off after the one sheep? I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't. I've got 99 sheep. That one's probably dead. It's tripped over and has freaked out, or some small animal has come by and killed it because sheep can't take care of themselves. And it's just not worth it. You have 99 other sheep. Why go after that one? Right? And not just that, but Jesus says, not only does he leave it, but he's out there until he finds it. I'm telling you, I would call the search off at dark. I'd be like, all right, it's dead. Sorry. I'll go take care of the 99. That's me. I mean, you have 99% of your investment still hanging out in the field. A 1% loss is not that big of a hit. Especially to risk the rest of your investment to go recover it. Right? So I think I would just cut my losses. Say, tough to be that sheep, but that's the life of the sheep. And I would take care of the rest of the flock. But that's not the point that Jesus is trying to make. So he continues the story. And this is in verse 5. And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. This dude is throwing a sheep party for one sheep. It's ridiculous. It's 1% of his investment, and he's celebrating recovering it. And I'm speaking as the owner of the business, not as a sheep. As a sheep, you would want somebody to come after you. I mean, I would be afraid I would fall over at any moment. But anyway, as a business owner. So, there's a few points to make here. Jesus doesn't get along well with the Pharisees. They don't play well together. And Jesus is standing here calling God a shepherd, which is the lowest of classes. And then he's also calling the Pharisees sheep. Because in verse 7 he says, I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. So I think there was a little bit of a gasp in the Pharisee community. What did he say? God is a shepherd? I don't know about you, but I'm not a sheep. If somebody pushes me over, I will get up onto my feet. But this wouldn't have been brand new to these Pharisees. If you guys remember a couple weeks ago, I think it was my last sermon, I kind of gave a history of what a young Jewish child would go through. And they memorize a good portion of the Bible as a child. So it's safe to say the majority of these Pharisees have at least memorized through Psalm. And Psalm 23 says, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. It's a common discussion at the time of Jesus. Rabbis would discuss what in the world the psalmist was thinking for calling God a shepherd. That's how low shepherds were on the totem pole. So these guys were familiar with that passage. They knew God is our shepherd. We're sheep. He leads us around with a rod so that we stay safe, because if not, we're all alone and we'll die. They also probably had memorized through the prophets, and the prophet Isaiah said, we all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way. So they knew people have a tendency to wander off just like sheep. We're not good at taking care of ourselves. We're not good at defending attacks because we're like sheep. We conform to the group. It's easy for us to follow people. And so Jesus is saying everybody is lost at some point in their life. Because we're just like sheep. we look over and we say, oh, that woman's hot, and we walk over there and we say, they're not going to miss that money at work, and so we walk over there, and I can get away with this one lie, and we walk over there, and before we know it, we're completely lost and all alone, and our world is falling apart. And that's true for everybody, even for the Pharisees who look like they have it all together. Because Isaiah didn't say, we all except for the Pharisees. All of us except for the people who look like they have it together have gone astray. No, he said everybody has gone astray. But we have this awesome fact that God is actively pursuing us. I want you guys to think about that for just a second. God is after you. So just like sheep, we get frantic, right? We try to do it on our own. We try to get back into the flock by our own means, and you just end up getting more lost because you have no idea, right? You might make some right decisions, but those are going to be followed by wrong ones, and you're just going to be more messed up than before. But we know that this creator of the universe is looking for us. He's running after us. And like in the parable, he's not going to stop until he finds us. Think about that for a second. He's not going to stop until he finds you. Whatever deep, dark place you're in, no matter how alone you feel, he's not going to stop until he finds you. And another interesting thing is if you continue this verse in Isaiah 53, it says, we all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. So Jesus obviously knew this verse was going to come to mind to the Pharisees. They had that memorized. And what the end of this verse is talking about is the idea of a scapegoat. In the Hebrew tradition, they would have a festival called the Day of Atonement, where they would make amends with God. And what that looked like is they would have two goats. One goat would get his throat slit, and they would sacrifice it as an offering. The other goat would metaphorically have the sins of the people placed on it, and they would kick it out into the wilderness. And it would take the sins of the people away so that the Israelites could live in community with each other. And it's not just something that the Israelites practice. Shunning happens in all societies. To maintain the cohesiveness of the whole, you find one person to throw the blame on, and you push them out of the group. And it makes you feel better, and it makes the group come closer together. And we see it all the time. All religions have some form of this, all social groups. It's known as a scapegoat. What Jesus is alluding to here is the fact that the Messiah that's being talked about in Isaiah 53 is the scapegoat of the people. He's taken the sins and the iniquities of everybody, and he was pushed out to die. And so we can't do that to people anymore. He's paid that price. And so we, which we often do, can't throw a bunch of blame on this one person so that we feel better about where we are. We can't exclude this group so that we can feel like we're doing the right thing. Because Jesus paid for everyone's iniquities, everyone's sin. We don't have a scapegoat anymore. In fact, when a scapegoat happens and a group throws a bunch of blame on one person and pushes them out, that's the person that God goes after. And not just that, but when he finds them, heaven throws a party. Shouldn't we as the church be about doing stuff that makes heaven celebrate? And that's the reason we bring up this mission every week, because it's not just to remind you guys, it's to remind ourselves as a leadership. The reason that we're here is to love, serve, and multiply. And that's everybody, every broken person, everyone that comes through the door. We want to love them and serve them and bring them into a relationship with God. And everybody that's out in life and alone and in a dark place, we want to go find that person. Because God's after them. And we should be about that too. So today, I just ask you guys, we all like sheep have gone astray. And I think we're all equally the 99 who stay behind, and we're also the one who's all alone. And throughout our life, we cycle back and forth. If you're going through something today and you feel all alone, you feel like there's nothing that you can do, God's after you. And we would love to pray for you. Mark and Danielle will be in Jim Bob's office during this last song if you want to go get prayer. But I want you to just rest on the fact that the creator of everything is relentlessly pursuing you. He wants you. Let's pray.